Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And today we will be reviewing Black Panther, the 18th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then we'll be discussing what should superhero movies be like in 2018. But before that, Nick, what have you been watching, reading, listening to, eating recently?
I decided, prompted by them finally putting it up on Amazon Prime after deleting it from Netflix a few years back, I decided to get back on Battlestar Galactica. Having seen 2 seasons on Netflix, I've now got, depending on how you split it, according to Amazon, I've got 2 seasons left to watch on Amazon, and then I will finally have seen that entire show, and I can cross another item off my premium telly classics I would like to have seen list. After doing The Wire and Deadwood last year, I'm slowly but surely getting food.
So are you enjoying it? Or enjoying getting back to it?
Yeah, there was a bit of re-entry pain. I mean, fortunately, the plot at the end of Season 2, which I guess I shouldn't spoil because there are some quite good twists at the end of Season 2, and it would be a shame to ruin them for anyone who hasn't seen it. But the plot at the end of Season 2 did provide quite a good sort of ease-me-in starting point to get me back into the show, sort of slowly reintroduce everyone in a slightly different setting and then just sort of work back into the story. It's still got that sort of edge of both the slight feeling that there's some level of sophisticated actual sci-fi going on and thoughts about what culture would be like if humanity was forced to abandon Earth in a fleet of spaceships. And, they've still got quite a good eye for the sort of exciting cliffhanger, big action moments, extreme moments of sudden peril, which they always put at the end of episodes. Yeah, I'm still enjoying it quite a lot. The sort of weird religious stuff, which has always played out the edges, seems to be getting more and more prominent, which, I don't know, I'm curious whether that's going to just subsume the show at some point. I know that the received wisdom seems to be that at some point Battlestar Galactica does go shit, even if there's seems to be some uncertainty exactly how late in the run it goes shit. For now, I don't think it's gone shit. About halfway through Season 3, I think it's still quite good.
It certainly jumps the shark, but you're probably a long way from the point when it jumps the shark, so you've got lots of good stuff ahead of you. I can remember there was quite a large cast of characters, which is one thing I remember if I took a break between seasons, there was always a couple of episodes when I was like, remember, who exactly are you and how do you relate to? And after a few episodes, you're like, oh yeah, now I remember what the deal with this is.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's the case in whatever form you watched it on, but the versions of Amazon Prime, happily, do have quite extensive previously montages. This could probably be a clue to how dense this show is. Every episode has about 2 or 3 minutes reminding you who the fuck everyone is. Or at least who the characters who aren't, part of the main cast are. As I say, I'm getting to it. At this point, 10 or 11 episodes in, I'm pretty solidly back on board. And it is, mostly very sort of good, strong, character-based stuff. There was quite a silly episode where they had to blow off steam in a boxing match, and even that was quite good. So there's the mark of a good show, I feel, when I can read the synopsis and think, that's ridiculous. People who follow me on Twitter may have seen me mocking it slightly on Twitter. And then still, actually, no, that episode was quite good. That'll show me to be such a giggling thick.
Yeah, I remember that episode being a good one. It was it's the sort of episode which a lot of arc shows do, which is we're going to take a break from the overall arc plot for one episode to do a character-focused episode. And sometimes those episodes can feel a bit like the fillers, and you're kind of like, yeah, this is all right, but I'm kind of wanting you to get back to the plot now. That's sort of what I'm here for. But I remember that episode actually being, no, that was a good character intermission. They just got through a major plot sequence, which I won't spoil for people who haven't seen the show, and then it felt like an appropriate time to take stock for an episode and see where all the characters were at after some pretty monumentous events.
Yeah, as I say, the whole they blow off steam by having a boxing tournament thing. Sometimes with Battlestar Galactica, you get sort of the occasional stark reminder that this sort of very military culture just isn't my culture, possibly in a world where the entire of humanity has been packed onto a few fleets with the military in primary control, probably things would be a bit harsher and a bit stricter than they are in our delightful world where I can just wander around aimlessly doing whatever I want. So it's possible that things like the boxing match to blow off steam are a lot more plausible in a more heavily military culture than the one I live in. Who knows?
Yeah, I think it's also slightly, shall we say, overt writing in the sense that these 2 characters have a disagreement. They can literally thrash it out.
It's yeah. We have a few characters who have some tension between them. What plot device can we use to make them literally just fight? How subtle should we be? Not very. Okay, let's do it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of more of the point of that episode. It's can we find a visual way to express the fact that these 2 characters aren't getting along after a few recent episodes? Well, I've got a very visual way of doing that.
But no, despite the possible on-the-nose nature of the boxing episode, it's a good show, and I'm quite happy to be back to it. I look forward to seeing how many more good episodes I've got left out of... I think I've got a good 30, just under 30 episodes left before the end, so hopefully at least a decent chunk of those will be good.
Yeah, they did proper epic 22-episode seasons of that show, so you've got a lot to go, and you've got a lot of good stuff in your future.
Okay, well, I'm sure I may well report back in a few months' time when I finally finish the whole thing. So that's me. Alistair, what other things have you been consuming?
I've been watching Derry Girls, a new Channel 4 sitcom set in Northern Ireland, written by Lisa McGee.
Oh, okay, yeah, you're on the buzz with this, aren't you? I've heard a lot of people talking about this, but I haven't got around to watching it myself.
Yeah, it's been getting a lot of traction on, social media and a lot of good write-ups in the press. It's really funny. I think it deserves to be getting the attention it is getting because it's a sitcom. It is funny. Exactly. It does what it says in the tin. Each episode has got a very sort of high density of good jokes. No, not only is it funny, it's got that sort of coming-of-age sort of story. It's about a group of people in their sort of late teens or teens just before they become adults. It's got that sort of quite sweet coming-of-age sort of story and a lot of, like, teens being silly. Kind of that sort of sense of humour that the In-Betweeners had, but maybe not quite as dirty as the In-Betweeners was. Not that the In-Betweeners wasn't very funny, but it's got that sense of, like, teenagers can be really stupid sometimes just because they don't know any better. They're trying to negotiate the adult world. But more than that, it could just be another generic teen sort of based sitcom, but the fact that it's set in Northern Ireland does mean it's got a different feel to it. It's not just, oh, here's another group of teenagers in some vague British city that could be anywhere. And also, crucially, it's set in the 90s. So it is quite nice. There's a lot of, like, 90s nostalgia. There's, like, quite a lot of...
Irish boy bands? But Boyzone big in Ireland? I had to assume so.
Yeah, well, I think it was... Well, there was a lot of, like, British things. I can't remember now, but there's, like, there's one episode that's based around a house party, and, like, all the songs are things I remember from school discos. So it's got a lot of sort of 90s nostalgia. But also, because it's Northern Ireland in the 90s, the Troubles are still going on. So, you can have like a scene on the school bus and there's just kids being silly on the school bus. And then all of a sudden the bus stops and like soldiers with guns are getting on and like, checking everyone. And all of a sudden it kind of goes from funny to really not funny, which I think is really interesting how it does have these occasional quite dark moments. I don't know, yeah, related to the Troubles. And I think in some ways is that like a commentary on nostalgia that we always look back on like the kind of fun and like optimistic bits of the past and forget the unpleasant bits. So in some ways I think it's making the fact that it's set in the 90s in Northern Ireland is in some way a quite clever sort of commentary on sort of nostalgia culture, as well as having some nice moments of nostalgia.
I don't know, I'm capable of looking back on my school days and thinking, okay, some of the TV and music and comics were good, but actually going to school was largely a pain. Yeah,
which is I think a lot of... these kind of in-betweeners, like school-based coming-of-age stories are like, you forget like what the bullying was like or the desperately cramming for an exam and then freaking out because you think you're going to fail. Yeah, there's a lot of like relatable teenage stuff in there, trying to work out school crushes and generally being in that sort of awkward phase when you're clearly not a child but also clearly not an adult and sort of the kind of being trapped in the middle. I guess that's again why the show was called In-Betweeners.
So it was either that or the fact that they were neither cool nor nerds or something. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I think that works in several ways.
Yeah, no, I do need to watch that. That is definitely one of the things that's on the watch list. It's only like 6 20-minute episodes, isn't it? So I'm sure I can manage it.
Yeah, it's all on all 4. You can catch up in an evening. And it is really good and really, really worth it. It is just generally funny, and I think it's also got maybe a bit more substance going on as well as them being a straight teen-based sitcom. And I also like the fact it's getting a lot of attention because it's probably a good thing that we're focused on Northern Ireland right now and Northern Ireland's recent history, what with everything that's going on about Brexit and Northern Irish borders being back in the news. And a lot of people, I don't know, I've heard some people say to me things along the line of like, why is this such a big deal? And I was like, well, if you watch Derry Girls, you will probably understand why this is such a big deal, because in the recent past, like I say, there were British Army soldiers getting onto school buses as a sort of as a regular experience, and the fact that the teenagers are just kind of the thing that annoys them most about the soldiers on their bus is the fact they're going to be late for school and get in trouble. They're just completely acclimatized to the regularity of this sort of thing. So this is something I think more people should be aware of because it's happened within our lifetime, and I'm not that old.
Or are you? Yeah, I probably need to watch that, partly because I don't, to be honest, have much cultural awareness of things like the Troubles, and anything which makes me slightly more grounded in what the hell's going on in the world is probably a good thing, and partly because, I don't know, it seems like I never watch any British sitcoms. It seems like I barely watch any sitcoms at all, apart from Brooklyn Nine-Nine and The Good Place, which are both made by the same production company. So anything which diversifies me slightly is probably a good thing.
Yeah, I don't watch many sitcoms either. My go-to entertainment is TV dramas or drama films. But I really liked Derry Girls.
Yes, we watch long, important TV dramas.
Yeah, serious, weighty stuff like Battlestar Galactica.
Premium telly for life. Okay, our review for this week, our first big superhero adaptation of 2018 is Black Panther, the new and, as Alistair said, apparently, I haven't checked, 18th film from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is, of course, also their 10th anniversary year, so it's nice that they finally made a film starring a non-white protagonist. Well done, guys. So yep, this is directed by Ryan Coogler and starring Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa, who is the former prince and now king of the fictional African country of Wakanda after his father was killed in a terror attack back in Captain America Civil War. So having done the basic intro setup in that film, we can now move straight into a film about young T'Challa taking the throne and struggling with his newfound power. It's here, it's widely anticipated, it's probably not a massive spoiler to say that yes, it's widely acclaimed, and deservedly so, I think. I'm going to go straight in and say I pretty much liked it. How about you, Alistair? Did you like the widely acclaimed film?
Yes, it was good. Yeah, it was a very good action movie. There were some great action sequences. It had the Marvel, occasional jokes, so it doesn't take itself too seriously. There's good banter between the characters. I mean, I only saw it last night, so it's still quite fresh, and films usually look best, I think, directly after you see them. But I would certainly put this film right now in the top flight of Marvel's cinematic universe. I think it's up there with like the original Guardians of the Galaxy, Iron Man 3, Captain America, Winter Soldier. I did really, really like it. Partly because, it's good, it's funny, it's got good action, but it felt much more of its own sort of thing, more than, say, like Ant-Man or even Doctor Strange. It felt like they were doing something a bit different, just as like Guardians of the Galaxy felt like they were doing something a bit different. It's partly because this film has its own distinct visual identity based around Afrofuturism, which is sort of the combination of African, or at least non-white European culture kind of combined with aesthetics and science fiction and fantasy elements. So there's a lot of that, which is really interesting. It's got a very large cast of pretty much entirely African-American actors. As people point out on Twitter, this isn't the first major Hollywood blockbuster to be fronted by an African-American, but I think this film goes beyond, say, what Independence Day or Hancock did. It was just the breadth of the cast. We saw a preview with director Ryan Coogler doing an intro, and he mentioned that, obviously we've had Will Smith and Denzel Washington being big stars for a long time, but they've never done a film together. The fact that there were so many African-American stars in this film, it really felt like they were telling a different story and combined with this Afrofuturism thing, it really was a story that was like celebrating blackness and African culture, which I think really made it quite distinctive.
Yeah, I think, as you say, the big hook to this, and one of the reasons why it is one of the best Marvel films, yeah, certainly a standout in the Marvel films, is that it does feel like a universe within itself. It doesn't feel like an appendix. It doesn't feel like more of what we're used to. And obviously, yeah, a lot of that is the newness of it, and, inevitably, if and when Black Panther 2 happens in however many years, it's not going to feel like as much of a, oh wow, this is something new. Not that that'll stop it being good, we've said many times before, but sequels are often capable of building on and improving the previous thing. But a lot of what's good in this particular one is like, wow, there's a whole new corner of this universe, and it does feel fully developed, and it does feel like it has this whole cast of characters against it. Like a lot of new solo films, like especially, it has to be said, some of the slightly weaker ones, like say Doctor Strange, it does feel like basically the only character that really exists is the main character, and everyone else just sort of orbits around him. And possibly because, as you say, as director Ryan Coogler briefly said in the Q&A we saw, perhaps because this is seen as such a major landmark film in terms of black stars taking prominence in film, he's got a lot of major actors in this. Like, there are some pretty major talents in roles which a lot of the rest of the time you kind of expect Marvel to put someone relatively unknown in because they're, I don't know, because they don't care that much or because they're famously stingy. But on this occasion you have like Daniel Kaluuya, who was the lead character of Get Out, playing what is a relatively small background role in the film, or at least a B to C list character. There's Danai Gurira, who's one of the main characters in The Walking Dead, playing what is a secondary part. Yeah, it's just a very, very impressive cast who do a lot to round out these characters and make every single one of them quite memorable, and as a result it does feel like you're standing in the middle of a quite developed universe. And, a lot of people I'm going to be generous and call them people, on the internet will complain about why does diversity matter, just tell a good story. And the reason why a slightly different culture matters is that it does, if nothing else, create this sense of newness. It does mean that it doesn't feel like every other superhero film. So it does give it this sort of real excitement of the newness. And the fact that it's actually done really well and, as I just said, has a huge and really good cast is then the icing on the metaphorical cake that I've just decided I'm referring to.
Yeah, I think you're completely right in the fact that, it's all about kind of this new corner of the Marvel Universe. And I think in the film, again, this is something that the director said in the Q&A. They worked really hard to make Wakanda feel like a country. It's quite diverse in itself. It's got diverse landscapes. There's city, there's a savanna, there's a sort of rocky waterfall bit. It's got diverse terrain. It's got diverse architecture. It's got different groups within it. There's the sort of 5 tribes that make up the nation. It's not one homogenous culture like almost every country in our world. It's made up of different groups, and it's got internal politics. A lot of the characters that you mentioned, they each represent a different part of Wakanda, or a different group within it, which does give it this real sense of this is a whole place that we've discovered, which is again why I think it's quite similar to, say, Guardians of the Galaxy, in that opened up a whole new universe, and there was different alien species, and there were different planets and different cultures and conflicts between them. It kind of really did broaden the Marvel universe out a bit.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, this film is obviously going to be very important to a lot of people who feel that they're seeing their culture represented for the first time, and obviously that's not something we can speak to extensively because we are, as we may have mentioned before, deeply white. But yeah, this is what gives a lot of Marvel stuff, and I mean in general, I don't just mean these films on this occasion, going way back to the original comics, a lot of what has given Marvel stuff its power is that it's the world outside your window. It's the idea that although they're putting obviously flying people or whatever on it, the idea that the culture they're using, the background, a lot of the backgrounds are taken from real cultures, and obviously that's both what gives it its power when it works, like it does here, or what gives it the ability to blow back in their faces when they get it slightly wrong, like they have in previous years with Iron Fist or Doctor Strange or whatever. And the fact that it can succeed amazingly and create something that's genuinely huge and important to a lot of people, like again this film, is why they're probably going to keep doing it, because imagine the reward you get when it pays off.
Yeah, which it certainly does pay off here. Yeah, I think the comparison to Doctor Strange and Iron Fist is a very apt one, because they're sort of ones when it's all about sort of a white Western outsider going into a different culture and mastering that culture's traditions and sort of becoming kind of the best in that culture very quickly. What I thought was quite interesting about Black Panther is that because it's set in this whole fictional country and they've got a lot of stuff to get through, the easiest way to write it would be, okay, let's take an outsider perspective. We'll have someone who's an outsider to Wakanda coming into it and discovering it. And there's Martin Freeman plays Everett K. Ross, a character we saw in Captain America Civil War.
And he was, of course, in the original, in the Christopher Priest Black Panther run, playing exactly the role you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly, coming into the world and discovering it. But they didn't actually write it like that, although Everett K. Ross is one of the main supporting characters in the film. It starts with Black Panther, and it's mainly from his perspective, and it just drops you right into the middle of the world because it's his world and he knows it. So what we are getting is an insider's perspective of Wakanda, which is good because it centers the African characters at the core of the film, rather than say taking this outsider perspective, which is what Doctor Strange or Iron Fist have, and it just doesn't work as well as a story.
Yeah, I mean, I like the Christopher Priest stuff, as anyone who's paid attention to my comics-related talk for longer than 5 minutes has probably noticed. But yeah, I think it's, considering what they've managed to do with this film in making it this cultural moment, it's probably a good thing that they didn't play the protagonist of this film is actually Everett K. Ross, the white man discovering Wakanda, because that would have kind of missed an opportunity, I feel. I mean, to be honest, they've steered away from that to the extent that you'd almost wonder what Everett K. Ross is doing here, other than just providing a shout-out to all the Priest fans. And as a Priest fan, I kind of appreciate it, but he doesn't have the same role, and he's just kind of there to go, hi, I'm here.
I think he's also there to provide some continuity to the broader Marvel Cinematic Universe. As we said, this is a story that takes place in a kind of new and slightly separate part of the universe. So he's there to link the story into Captain America Civil War, which both Black Panther and the Everett K. Ross character were in, and then also, and via Captain America to the rest of the universe. He's kind of the continuity aspect, I think.
Yeah, as I say, it's not really anything that bothers me. It's not as if he drew focus from anyone else. In fact, he drew so little focus, but you end up thinking, oh, okay, cool, I guess you're here. I mean, aside from the culture of it, a lot of what's good about this film and distinct is also the story of this sort of king struggling with power and dealing a little with politics is something that they've maybe flirted with in the 4 franchise. The 4 sub-franchise, whatever, but never really done that well. Like, in the first couple of 4 films, they sort of had a little go at it, and then tended to just get bored and go and write about 4 punching some stuff. And in the third 4 film, they've just ditched it entirely and turned it into a space comedy. Yeah, I think this is, although it's not the first time they've tried for something like this, dealing with this sort of weighty tone of heavy is the head that wears the crown, it is the first time they've really committed to it and done it actually well, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of sci-fi stories that do sci-fi court politics. There's a lot of bad takes on that. But again, this worked really well. I thought Michael B. Jordan, who plays the main antagonist, and also, again, who's a sort of... I mean, I don't want to say too much to spoil the film, but there's, again, a sort of a court politics element to the conflict between him and the Black Panther character. They're both fighting over to be the king of Wakanda. That's, again, Wakanda's very much centered in the story, and Black Panther as its ruler. Again, the crown is like an important MacGuffin in this story. Yeah, that sort of court politics element is very much at its core, but I think it partly because it's acted so well. And as I said, this film has a very large cast and lots of people are very good. But if I had to choose a favourite, I thought Michael B. Jordan in the role of the primary antagonist was exceptional. Whenever he's on film, you just were drawn to him. And even though, like, his first few scenes, he's kind of very much in the background doing scenes with Andy Serkis, reviving his character from Avengers Age of Ultron. And even though obviously Andy Serkis' character is supposed to be the focus, you always find yourself in some way being drawn towards Michael B. Jordan. He's very good. And he's worked with the director before. They both made Creed, the new film in the Rocky franchise. And as you say, yeah, Michael B. Jordan's big enough to open a film in his own right, a film like Creed, but he's a supporting character in this film, but very good.
Chadwick Boseman himself as T'Challa the Black Panther, I think it's a role that could quite easily have been a most boring character in own film type hero, and I think Chadwick Boseman makes it work mostly on raw charisma. I mean, he's not the first person in the modern superhero films, especially in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, to do that. I mean, Chris Evans does something quite similar with Captain America. But yeah, it's notable because Chadwick Boseman often does have to do quite a lot of put upon, struggling, royalty, ponderous, my burdens moments, and it could be quite dull. And also the film, the tone of it resists the temptation to go straight in with a joke when he's having those moments. Like, a lot of Marvel films, especially Guardians of the Galaxy, is quite bad for this, but in general it's become part of their, let's say, house style, is that, whenever the film's been too serious for too long, like, say, a whole couple of minutes consecutively, they'll normally come in with the one-liner. And in this film, they do allow them to have these little long, thoughtful moments to try and make it very clear that these are, serious, thoughtful people dealing with the throne of Wakanda, which is actually a serious, important thing. And they do also, mess around and have fun, and there are enough jokes thrown in to stop them feeling like a stodgy court drama. But yeah, Chadwick Boseman is allowed to, ponder the importance of his role at length and in a way that's, surprisingly compelling, considering how dull I've probably just made it sound.
Yeah, I think you're right that it's very good that they resisted the urge to constantly be sort of subverting the tension with jokes, because you want to believe in Wakanda as a place and believe that in its tradition and its culture, and also believe that the crown is important and stuff. And if they were constantly making jokes or whatever about it, it would sort of deflate the sense of tension. It's good to use humour where possible so things don't get too serious, but also it was good that they felt confident enough in this story to kind of not kind of press the humour as much as they would. I mean, it's interesting that the 3 movies that Marvel made last year, and we might talk about this more in the next segment, were, I think, 3 of the funniest ones they've ever made, like Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, Thor Ragnarok. They really pushed the humour to, I thought, another level, which is what made them good. It made them better than the average summer action blockbuster because they had a lot of humour. In this one, I thought it was interesting that they took a different approach in that it was a more serious film. They were more deep exploration of what the culture of this place was like, what these characters were like. Less of a need to be constantly wisecracking and basically, the audience will fall asleep if we don't make them laugh every 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess speaking of this film's relationship to the superhero formula, if I had to pull a criticism out of my arse, and, why not? Possibly the ending ran on a couple of beats too long. There was, as often happens in these films, there was a point where I was a bit sort of, I am now ready for you to stop fighting.
Yeah.
Anytime you want to stop the fighting and move on with the actual plot is fine by me. I have now seen the fighting.
You had quite a large sort of big action scene at the end, which was spectacular. But yeah, I mean, a lot of superhero films fall into the trap of having a bit too much of a sort of big action spectacular at the end.
I'd be saying this about all of them, to an extent. Some of them recently have been doing a good job of pulling it back a bit. This one possibly let it run a bit long, but, it's not the worst offender in this area by any regard.
It's certainly better than, say, the ending of Wonder Woman. And I thought Wonder Woman was a good film, kind of let down at the end by it just breaks down to Wonder Woman punches sort of CGI-shaped thing until eventually the film ends. Whereas in this, actually, the final conflict, because they built up the characters and the political tensions of Wakanda and all things like that, there was a real sense of these were real people fighting over something tangible at the end. So it avoided that pitfall of just the big CGI wank off at the end.
Yeah, but as you say, because they'd actually establish who everyone is, therefore you actually care. Yeah, and in terms of the other characters and who they are, I also particularly liked Letitia Wright's Shuri, who did have a very sort of crowd-pleasing, charming role and did, squeeze a lot out of it. I enjoyed that quite a lot.
One thing I also thought about this film is, as well as having a really large cast of black actors, but also what I thought is it's got a very large cast of women characters. I think they deliberately thought so. They didn't want to make this a film about male blackness or the male experience. They wanted to have a diverse range of female characters, which I thought was really good. And there were some very good performances from a lot of the leading actresses, especially and I don't know how to pronounce this. Danai
Gurira, yeah, she's the one I mentioned who's one of the main Walking Dead characters. Yes, she is one of the best things in that show as well.
Yeah, and I thought she was excellent in this film. Again, someone, whenever she was on screen, you're just sort of drawn to her performance, even if this is a scene with the protagonist in it, you're drawn towards her.
Well, the Black Panther's elite group of female bodyguards is something that, again, sort of started from the priest run, and I think has been developed a bit, because it was quite simplistic. He has these cool Amazon bodyguards in the priest stuff, and it's been developed a bit more in the recent Ta-Nehisi Coates comics, which I've read a few of. That there was just a footnote to show that I know things about the comics. Although, while I'm here, from a Priest fan standpoint, I think there's a lot of world-building stuff here for the Priest comics. And of course, Everett K. Voss is in it. Plus, Okeo and Nakia, I think, are characters from the Priest comics. Possibly Zuri as well. But it doesn't actually keep much of a tone for the Priest comics because, I don't know, they've always been a bit more cynical. And of course, in the Priest comics, the Black Panther is a lot older and more, experienced and hard to surprise. He's a lot more the sort of scheming Batman figure, whereas here he's obviously a lot younger, a lot newer to the whole thing.
Yeah, I think they were definitely going with sort of the younger take on the character, partly because a lot of the story is about him coming into power, assuming the throne, struggling with its responsibilities. And also a key part of the plot is his relationship with his father, who died in Captain America Civil War. To do all that stuff, you really have to have a younger Black Panther. But maybe if they do a second one or something, a third one, they can grow the character in that way and have a different take on it, an older, more experienced Panther.
Yeah, that's the... but my other real complaint, but, I do quite like the whole world they've created, and now I'm going to have to wait, several years to maybe see it one, maybe two more times if I'm lucky. Cool.
Yeah, that's the most disappointing thing about this, is that I really love the world of Wakanda. Like I say, it had a strong sense of place. And I really like these characters, and there's such a broad range of them, they're all really good. And it's going to be a while since we get to see any of them again. Well, I suppose some of them will be in Avengers Infinity War. Black Panther himself will be in it, and I think so will some of the supporting cast. But it'll be a long time before we get to see the whole sort of spectacle of Wakanda again. And I feel a bit sad about that. You have to wait till 2021 or 2020 or something like that. I don't know when they're going to make the sequel. I assume one is coming.
I assume so. I mean, we're recording this before the films even come out in Britain or America, because we saw it at an early preview, because we're a very important media outlet. So we have no real sense of how well film has done, but I think the general expectation is it's going to be not Avengers level massive maybe, but pretty massive. But we'll see. I mean, I'm very interested to see what this does, just in my statistics curious hat.
Certainly I felt this set the bar for superheroes very high for 2018. This is the first superhero film of the year. There's quite a few coming out. We can talk about that more in the next segment, but I think it set a high bar, and I'll be really blown away by any film that managed to surpass that bar.
Yeah. Probably a good moment to cut to the next segment. Okay, so all that being said about Black Panther, we're now at the start of a new year of superhero films. This is, of course, the 10-year anniversary of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. At this point, superheroes are, perhaps to some people's surprise, including kind of mine, to be honest, still kind of dominant in mainstream cinema. So, what should they be in 2018? What should we expect from them? Should they be doing better? Should they be doing worse? I don't know. Alistair, what should they be in 2018?
Well, there's two sort of strains to this, both of which I think you can see quite prominently in the superhero films of 2017. There's two things I think they need to do. The first thing is to build on the successes of 2017. We've said it several times on this podcast, the humour plus action, witty banter, sort of Joss Whedon-esque kind of tone works really well. You know, being generally funny, not too weighty.
It does work quite well, although I do kind of almost feel like trying to build on the Joss Whedon tone is what sometimes leads Marvel down a bit of a blind alley.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's not without its risks, and we've just spent a long time praising Black Panther for not doing that. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but I do think, and the second thing, which this kind of relates to, is learn from the failures and disappointments of 2017. And if you look at, say, last year's DC films, especially Justice League, the over-serious tone, the lack of humour, really, doesn't lead to a great film. And also having too much empty spectacle. We've talked about the problems with the ending of Wonder Woman kind of breaking down to empty spectacle. But Justice League really was just kind of empty spectacle from start to finish. So yeah, try to learn from some of these mistakes would be, I think, would be good, especially for DC and Warner Brothers.
Yeah, it is nice that Black Panther didn't break down too much at the end, because one slight problem with Wonder Woman is, although you can talk about what an amazing, important and a lot of the time great and uplifting film it was, you do then have to include a slightly mealy-mouthed, except for the ending, of course, which was rubbish, bit. Whereas Black Panther, although it could possibly have been a couple of beats shorter, I don't think the ending was rubbish. I think the ending actually was largely the epic showdown it needed. But anyway, yeah, I think at this point, 10 years in, it's... But I did enjoy 2017 because I think they did do some good jokes. Jokes? Well, I've preempted by a point there. They did do a lot of good films by mostly focusing on jokes. Although, it's also probably good that they've started 2018 by demonstrating that they can also make a good film that isn't built entirely around jokes. Because, although, as I've said, at least 2 or 3 times, I do find Spider-Man swinging into walls hilarious, I suspect they probably need to build beyond that at some point. I mean, if our basic point is, what should superhero films be in 2018? More like the funny Marvel films and less like the boring, serious DC films, then we really are going to get letters about all the bribes we're clearly getting from Disney. Yeah.
What I think also that was important to do, I guess what you're kind of getting at, is avoid to keep on doing the same thing over and over with ever diminishing returns. The humour action thing is good, but don't keep doing it to the point when it's basically completely worn out. I think one of the things that made Marvel work well in 2017 is that they kind of upped the humour. They weren't kind of all right, so Avengers that's sort of the level we want to be at because people will get bored of it. They're like, no, funnier this time. Like Thor, but funnier. Spider-Man, but funnier.
Well, Spider-Man, I don't know. I thought Spider-Man worked because there was an attempt to actually re-establish that as a sort of teen comedy franchise. It worked because it didn't feel like too much like a riff on Avengers. It felt like it was Spider-Man as a riff on teen comedy. I mean, not, no one put their dick in an apple pie or anything, but
yeah,
it wasn't. It was at least gesturing down towards that genre.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. Yeah, and it's kind of reminded me of Derry Girls a bit in that, Spider-Man's trying to negotiate that awkward space between adolescence and adulthood.
I mean, not that I don't want to see Spider-Man putting his dick in an apple pie. Let's leave it here on that.
No, but there's I don't know, just the kind of the also, I mean, what we were saying about what made Black Panther so good was it felt like it was quite different to the other Marvel films, and Guardians of the Galaxy felt that they were quite different. But Spider-Man also, to a degree, felt that it was different in that this was someone at high school dealing with high school things, not dealing with so much the problems of the grown-up world. I mean, it wasn't opening a whole new universe, but it was opening. It was a different take on the superhero.
Yeah, I mean, not to the same extent that we talked about in Black Panther, but it was, it did feel like it was opening up a small new corner of it, and, a new corner to the extent that it's appropriate for Spider-Man. I mean, Spider-Man is your neighbourhood superhero, and therefore he's got his little New York neighbourhood, whereas Black Panther is the king of a whole country, therefore he's got the whole of Wakanda.
Yeah.
And therefore they're opening up new worlds to the extent that it feels kind of apt, whereas other Marvel things that haven't worked haven't really felt like they've built their own new corners to the same degree. I mean, I quite like Ant-Man, but I didn't really feel like it was making dramatic strides into its own direction.
I think they wanted it to look visually distinct with Edgar Wright's quite distinctive sort of visual style, but obviously he didn't see the project through to its completion. So maybe that why Ant-Man didn't maybe live up to what they had initially intended.
yeah, obviously our third film this year is the sequel to Ant-Man. I'll be curious if this is their chance to finally, really build their own film from the ground up and create something a bit more distinct.
Yeah.
But I have to wait and see. To be honest, Ant-Man and the Wasp is in a weird place where, because the first two films they're doing this year are so heavily anticipated and important seeming, Ant-Man and the Wasp is kind of just also happening.
Yeah, although it might actually benefit from having a little less pressure on it. I mean, the stakes are high for Black Panther, and it has risen to them. The bar has been set very high, and obviously there's a lot of pressure for Avengers Infinity War to, how should we say, not be another Justice League.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what superhero films should look like in 2018, obviously for a lot of people the big note will still be that it's slightly odd that they're still gigantically based around straight white men.
Yeah, more diversity.
The weird thing is, to me, that the direction of superhero movies has gone from being something you ask if you're, a big nerd, hi, to the question that everyone asks if they're slightly invested in the culture. Like, if you told 16-year-old Nick that people would care to the extent that they do about who played Iron Fist in the year 2018, then I'd have probably laughed at you.
Yeah.
Like, properly mocked you, because 16-year-old Nick was, like all teenage boys, a bit of a prick. To quote Spider-Man, yet again, great power, great responsibility. To paraphrase Spider-Man until his words have no meaning. And superhero movies have kind of had this thrust upon them, and whether they've yet fully risen to it, I don't know. Whether they fully want to acknowledge their place in the culture, or whether they want to just go, well, the honest truth is, guys, we're the product of socially conservative Hollywood producing material based on even more socially conservative 60s comics, each using the other as an excuse to continue being slightly conservative.
Yeah, or at least not to be revolutionary, not to challenge or change things too much. There's a path of least resistance, which is what enormous companies like Disney and Marvel are known for taking, and that is to not rock the boat and just to stick with, who are our most popular white male characters. Let's get the most popular white male actors to play them, and the most popular white male directors to make these films. But when they've kind of stepped out from that a bit, as Black Panther illustrates, they're doing well. So maybe people are finally getting tired of just so many white dudes in capes. Like I say, this is the 18th Marvel Cinematic Universe film, the first one, with a black lead character. There's also been enormous, it's been nearly 20 years since like X-Men came out, I think the first of this current wave of superhero movies. People have seen a lot of this stuff before, and they're definitely hungry for something a bit different. That's why maybe, these films are funnier than, say, X-Men or the original Spider-Man took things a bit more seriously. We're tired of things being quite so serious, so there's quite a lot of humour. Each film is kind of searching for its sort of distinct identity to stop them seeing so samey. There's Afrofuturism in Black Panther. There's, they introduce more comedy to Thor. Wonder Woman's got a World War One aesthetic, and also it's got the whole kind of Amazon warrior woman island thing. They're each searching for their own identity to stop people getting tired of the same old thing, which is one of the reasons why, other than the fact that I like diversity and I think it's good for our culture, seeing more diverse heroes will lead to better stories, really stories that people aren't so tired of. And if you care about superhero films, or even just the kind of action blockbuster format, you really should want people not to get tired of it. And diversity is a good way to stop people getting tired of it.
Yeah, I do kind of half accept that fans want to see a ripped from the page, looking just like the comics version of the character for his or her, but normally his, screen debut, because even if it does result in a somewhat whitewashed universe, I have been that nerd. I do know the feeling. But at the same time, even allowing for that desire, and, your mileage may vary about how much we should allow for that desire. At this point, almost every character has been done to some degree. I mean, more so in Marvel than DC, but even DC, thanks to the speed at which the, CW shows are churning through characters. But to be honest, not that many major DC characters that haven't been represented to some degree. Even the Martian Manhunter has been on Supergirl. So, I feel like we're hopefully getting to the point where the idea that, we need to see this character on screen just like they were before thing has kind of, even that's starting to get a bit exhausted, and they can start messing around a bit. Because, we're into some quite B-list characters when they search for new material. I mean, they're doing a series about Cloak and Dagger this year. That's a bit of a Marvel deep cut, to be honest.
Yeah. And also, I think, as you get to the slightly more obscure characters, there's less of that desire for them to be rendered exactly as they are in the comics, because they've got smaller followings. I think, for example, I think you said in Spider-Man Homecoming, the character of the Vulture isn't particularly similar to the Vulture in the comics, but I guess there's not a huge amount of people frothing with rage that they changed the character of the Vulture a bit.
No, well, you can get away with stuff with villains. I'm not sure the comics version of Killmonger is that much like the version we saw in last night's Black Panther film, but, you can pull off things a bit. But yeah, certainly the idea that you need to get the aesthetics exactly right must surely die off a bit in the end. I would say it helps that they're having to dive a bit deeper, and also they're having to get to slightly more recent stuff in order to continue making things. And you do eventually get to a point where even the people making Marvel comics or DC comics again did realise they should probably make some characters who aren't white dudes. So things do sort of naturally diversify a little. I mean, there's a reason why the more recent stuff like Jessica Jones and Runaways is a bit more varied than the older stuff they've been making for a while.
Yeah, well, yeah. Again, this diversity brings a different story to it, so that the formula doesn't get worn out quite so quickly.
Yeah.
The other, I think what we're kind of getting at to some degree is that there is an expectation for superhero films to be like the kind of the big films of the year, at least the big kind of action 12A moderate fantasy violence blockbuster.
Hey.
Yeah, got the name in there. Film. And I think what makes a good superhero and what they should aspire to is they need to be more than just another generic summer blockbuster, because the superhero films are not, I say, the only, summer blockbusters that come out each year, but a lot of them do feel fairly boilerplate summer blockbuster. That's partly because all of them are bad, but, if you look at, say, from the previous years, a film like Independence Day Resurgence, it's just a fairly boilerplate summer action spectacular. The schools are out, got to find something for like these kind of young teens to do. Let's just pass them off to the cinema to see like some cities get crushed for an afternoon. And it's kind of, no one really thinks about it or really cares that much. And in 5-10 years, it will be forgotten by almost everyone apart from people like us who were particularly scarred by how bad that film was. But for a superhero film, it needs to be something more. It can't be a forgettable boilerplate summer blockbuster.
Oh, it can. To be fair,
but it shouldn't be.
We saw Suicide Squad. There was nothing good or memorable about that.
No, exactly. But they should.
There's not some magic form. There's no magic reason why superhero films have to be better. We've just become accustomed / entitled to expecting better from like Disney, Marvel or whatever, because they have a habit of producing better things. But on the other hand, they could also shit out the occasional slightly forgettable Netflix series. So
yeah,
or this. I don't mean to pick on what might well end up being someone's favourite film, but I'm not massively bothered about this Venom film they're doing. That does look a bit like a slightly forgettable filler superhero film that's been crapped out.
Yeah, exactly. But they need to aspire to something more if they want to remain the kind of dominant go-to cultural touch point in our culture. I mean, I suppose TV is kind of slowly eclipsing film, or premium TV or new TV or whatever you want to call it, is sort of in the process of slowly eclipsing film as the main medium in our Western society. But cinema still packs a lot of punches, and especially these enormous superhero blockbusters are kind of the big ticket items on every studio slate for each year. That and like a few other big franchises like Star Wars, for example, which has surged back into popular consciousness again through Disney. There needs to be an element, I think, of them reaching for something more. I'm looking at this summer's blockbusters that aren't superhero ones. Things like Pacific Rim Uprising could end up being a fairly boilerplate, CGI things punch other CGI things. But, maybe it's like something like, a bit what the Marvel films do with a bit of humor, or, opening like a new world, even if that new world is a whole new country, or even it's just like teenage life. It does bring them something more, or going back to World War One, or introducing some diversity, like having a female lead or a black lead. So I get the sense they are reaching for more through diversity, both in front of and behind the camera, but also a sense of more than this is not just a forgettable, sort of 2 hours in the cinema just meant to distract you from the awfulness of your life. Oh, sorry, did I say too much there?
The more naked horror, but the more time you spend in the cinema, the less time you have to spend recording these podcasts. Am I right? Yeah, I don't know. We haven't really mentioned or touched on superhero fatigue. I guess I am curious when the sort of the big successful imperial phase of superhero films will finally end. Like, it does feel like they're less of an event than they used to be, but also nothing is clearly emerging to like take the crown, to use a slight Black Pantherism. I'm kind of curious whether if another genre of like mainstream films or another slate of mainstream films does finally connect properly, superhero films will finally beat a hasty retreat. Whether we've entered the strange resentful stage where people are kind of sick of them, but there's also nothing obvious to take the place, and you want to go out and do something, just anything to get out of the house and, as you say, distract yourself from the empty hollowness of day-to-day existence.
I mean, I think I've said this on the podcast before, but it bears repeating. The Western used to be utterly ubiquitous. It was like absolutely everywhere. They made huge numbers of Westerns for like 30 or 40 years. And now they do not exist. They're completely gone. Only in a few like independent films that want to revive the Western. Hollywood's tried to revive it a few times. in my life, and it's never worked. And the reason for that is basically people got utterly sick of them, and also they completely ran out of ideas. And everyone said that it was Blazing Saddles that killed the Western, because at that point people realised there was nothing that could be done in the Western genre other than just openly mocking it, because it was just completely, everyone's so sick of it and just done to death. And then after that, it just basically just doesn't really exist anymore. Some points I think like superheroes have sometimes even gone past that point. Like we've had people do
Deadpool.
Yeah, Deadpool, or Hancock, for example, things, films that are trying to like spoof or like kind of take a more overtly humorous approach, to superheroes. They're trying to do the Blazing Saddles, but maybe because people aren't as sick of them, Blazing Saddles came around the right point to kind of deal the death blow to the Western genre. It had been weakened, obviously, before that came along. Maybe people aren't that sick of superheroes yet, or maybe because they keep finding new ways to make them interesting. This is why people aren't so sick of them. Or maybe just because there isn't something ready to replace superheroes. Or maybe we're just sort of, I don't know, more cynical as a culture than we were in the 1970s or 1960s.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the reaction to Infinity War, which is, a bit bloated, a bit super traditional, a bit sort of, yep, here's some superhero action. That's going to be an interesting test balloon for how world weary we are about superhero films. Whether it turns out the only people who actually do see this as a slightly bloated, weary thing are sad, tired internet critics, and the fans and regular people will turn out in enormous numbers, or whether it will slightly underperform compared to what people might be expecting of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, when we get to kind of the big points in the sort of superhero franchises, like the ones they kind of build towards, the huge crossover films, I always feel that's kind of like a stress point for the superhero genre, in that if someone releases like a film like Avengers and it just utterly bombs and like really no one goes to see it, that will I think scare a lot of people and might restrict the amount of superhero movies that gets made.
Well, I mean, to an extent, that's just happened with Justice League.
Yeah, and it's, how many DC films their worst slated for release are actually coming out now? I mean, there's very little talk of the Flash movie coming out or another Ben Affleck Batman film. And it does seem like they've been scared a bit by their sort of track record of failure, especially with Justice League.
It's true. Yeah, I can imagine them abandoning the whole thing except Wonder Woman. Anyway, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, there is a sense with these films that they are building towards something. And I think that kind of is what helps to keep them interesting. And maybe that is something that superhero films should be in 2018, the sense of building towards like the big crossover films. We've had that for a while with Avengers. And, the Marvel one's building towards this Avengers film. But also I think what's important is for each film to kind of be individual and to stand on its own and not be dominated by arc plot.
Well, yeah, because I might be wrong, guys. Feel free to step in and correct me. But is anyone that invested in the Thanos storyline and his collection of Infinity Stones or whatever? I feel it's a bit. I think, if we're looking forward to anything for Infinity War, it's the chance to see everyone meet each other, especially like the Guardians people meeting the Avengers people. I don't feel like anyone cares that much about Thanos, but we'll have to wait and see.
I think you're right. That people aren't so invested in the Thanos aspect. They're more invested in the characters that they know and love and want to see them meeting up across franchises.
Well, yeah, the fact that the Guardians will meet the Avengers, the fact that we'll get to see Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans doing their thing, which has become an increasingly rare treat.
Yeah, the trailer's got scenes of Iron Man with Doctor Strange and Captain America with Black Panther and like War Machine with the Hulk. So
yeah, anyway, yeah, join us in about 12 episodes' time or something to see how that went.
That's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then why not subscribe wherever you get your podcasts? While you're there, please leave us a review, as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can hear back issues of this podcast, listen to bonus material, and read short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And of course, you can also follow us on social media. I think at this point, if you search for Moderate Fantasy Violence on both Twitter and Facebook, then our little logo should pop up, and then you should be able to just follow us and find out what films we are seeing, and of course when our episodes come out. And I believe there was also an article by Alistair about the ongoing impact of dystopian futures on the website recently, so you can probably find that as well. Okay, that really is it. I've been Nick Bryan. You can find me at nickbryan.com, including some comics I've written and had art commissioned for, and you can follow me on Twitter as @NickMB.
You can follow me on Twitter at Alistair J.R. Ball, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Thanks for listening. Next time we'll be discussing Guillermo del Toro's Oscar-nominated film The Shape of Water. Have a good one until then. Goodbye.
Bye. Yeah. Probably a good moment to cut to the next segment. Do you want to go to the toilet or should we go straight in?
I'm probably all right to just keep going.
All right.